Hello, welcome to the sideboard here at the Legacy Open in Philadelphia, part of the SCG Tour. I'm Nick Miller alongside Kent Ketter. How you doing, sir?
Great.
Coming off a second place finish in Modern with Eldrazi.
Yeah.
We're playing Legacy today. You're playing about 20, 30 of the same cards as you did last week.
Absolutely.
So everyone saw this deck blow up in Modern, and everyone immediately tried to port it over to Legacy, and there's been a bunch of different builds just kind of killing the online leagues. You know, you look through the league deck lists, 3 or 4 players are 5-0ing with some build of Eldrazi. Talk about your build, how you came to it, and some of the cool cards that we're seeing in this build as opposed to the others.
Okay. Well, first off, I was fortunate enough to kind of jump on the back of the development train with this one, with some of the folks out of North Carolina, Dylan Donegan, Harlan, one of the Bravermans, just great group of guys. There's some other people I'm sure I'm forgetting. I apologize. What they realized very quickly was the Eldrazi core.
Right.
Obviously very good.
So we're talking Mimic, Endless One, Thought Not Seer, Reality Smash.
Now, Endless One is definitely one that there's a little contention as, is it part of the core? It felt great to me, but some folks are looking at possibly as Displacer a card, or the real point of conflict is it Endless One or is it Lodestone Golem?
Obviously, those cards do a lot of different things. Lodestone's a lot better at prison and beating down, whereas Endless One, I feel like just like in Modern, just gives you a ton of flexibility.
And in here, what it's going to let you do is you're going to maximize your mana on the turns you have that luxury. Maybe you've already cast your turn 1 Chalice, or you've already got such a board presence in your creature matchups that you're just more than happy to tap all your mana sources, put some sort of 5/5 in play, and just start beating down with it. Lodestone was nice, but what I felt like it locked you into was having to play more of your City of Traders, and if you wanted to cast it on turn 2, which is an acceptable early, casting it on turn 3, Lodestone just kind of drops in value. You had to have access to something like Mox Diamond, and I felt like the deck was mana hungry, like I think all Eldrazi decks. Just if you can keep pumping them mana, they will do ridiculous things time and time again. So I didn't want to play a card like Mox Diamond that, while possibly getting ahead, wasn't as consistent as just tap Ancient Tomb, tap Eldrazi Temple.
Right, walking around the room here today, I've looked at a bunch of different Eldrazi decks. The conclusion many people are coming to are taking out Mox Diamond. So a lot of people are kind of going away from the card disadvantage to speed up to kind of have more consistency.
Right, like you can't afford to play Mox. I don't feel like you can afford to play Mox Diamond early into cards like Daze. You really can kind of sneak around those with other effects. Not that they're going to daze it, but it just feels like it's another piece you have to put together to get your deck to do what you want it to do. And this is a shops deck. It's shops. I don't know what else to call it. It was shops in Modern. It's shops here. Shop. But those decks, and what, from my understanding of what a shops deck does, is it is going to be the most consistent thing ahead of the curve whenever possible. Something like Mox Diamond, while giving you a chance to get ahead, other times it's just a Mox Diamond or nothing. So it didn't feel right in the curve of the deck, and I think having access to something like Phyrexian Revoker, 4 of in this version, alleviates the need for something like Lodestone early. Just a big fan of kind of assembling Revoker along with your already existing lock pieces.
Right, because you got Chalice, you also have Trinisphere. A lot of the builds we saw, building up to this week, sort of the Chalice, Thorn and Amethyst builds. You have Trinisphere instead and Revoker. Talk about their place in the deck.
So Revoker Trinisphere, I think, helps you immensely in your Sultai matchups with Deathrite Shaman. I'm not 100% if that's exactly where you need to be, but I like that application of those 2 cards in theory. But the big thing is, with Trinisphere, is you will lock people out of games. You will wasteland them down to 2 sources, you'll put them on 3 and say you're only going to cast 1 spell for the rest of the game every turn. That ties right into the shops deck. You're already trying to be more efficient on your mana every turn, so if I can restrict you to 1 spell, the lack of forces, the lack of the really busted cards don't really matter anymore.
Yeah, definitely the aggro shops approach, we see kind of now in Vintage. As well, this card we want to talk about. Inbringer. This has been all the rage in the Legacy builds of this deck.
So I actually was lucky enough to put some Inbringers in my regionals list that I lost with. I didn't realize it untapped. Didn't realize this until after my top 4 win, that it untaps twice. Modern, it's cute, it's fine, it's good, it's great with Bridge. In Legacy, it has a mode that just shuts off one of the decks in the format. It shuts off any of the big, cheat a dude into play, or creature, into play, and that alone makes it pretty ridiculous. And then people aren't really just killing 5/5s left and right.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in Legacy for a long time. You can very efficiently deal with the small creatures, but nobody really has ways to deal with the big creatures. You mentioned shutting down the bigger creatures with this. We talked something like Show and Tell.
Yeah.
They put in an Emrakul or a Gristlebrand. You put in an Endbringer. They don't get to attack.
No, and you can still attack or, do as you want with the Endbringer and, pretty effectively negate what they're trying to do. Obviously, second creature makes it a little awkward, but it's a nice card, and when you're casting it with 3 lands, the mana cost is somewhat irrelevant. So,
all right, all the abilities seem pretty relevant. I mean, if the game goes long enough to draw cards, that's good. But also the ping effect. There's a lot of decks in this format where you can just shoot down Delvers or Pyromancers or Infect creatures,
Elves. You just go through the list, and that's why he, for us, warranted, or for myself and Andrew Tenjum, who I worked with a little closer on the deck, we wanted the 3rd copy for that reason. And the amount of times where you just get to play against the fair decks is they're still present. Elves is fair as they unfair things can be, and this card just does a lot of work there. If they attempt to get on like the Crater Hoof plan, typically if you can shut off one of the Crater Hoofing attackers, it's an okay shot to try to get them. But really, you keep their creatures from getting out of control, and that ties in really well the fact that you can kill some of the smaller creatures with Endbringer.
Warping Whale.
Yeah, I did not think Warping Whale was going to be that great. And then once I exiled my first Deathrite Shaman, they go Deathrite Shaman, you go Chalice for 1, they go Thing, and then you exile the Deathrite Shaman, and suddenly their core of every deck with 4 Deathrite Shaman, which is, probably burn you out, Elves excluded, that's a huge way to just cut out what's probably, we'll say, 25 to 30% of their damage is coming from that 1 drop. You get to exile it.
Well, we just talked about all of the different things you can do with Endbringer. Warping Whale, similar to that, just has a bunch of modes that are relevant. And, a lot of people brought this up because of the envelop clause on it. Take away Terminus, take away, Reanimate or Show and Tell, that kind of stuff.
I think my favorite one, while the Reanimate and the Terminus and the Show and Tell are flashy and great, I've had a wonderful time just countering Hymnothorax or Ancestral Visions. It's the little things like that where you find out, like, oh, that's a sorcery, and that's a sorcery, and I'll counter this Ponder because I'm ahead on board and have the luxury. That's really nice as well. It's a card that surprised me because it hits all of your in-game, like, the cards you're worried about in a few decks, but it still is leaning towards beating creature decks. And that was my concern with a deck like this is, how do we do against the honest attacking decks? And with Endbringer and Warping Whale, along with, some of these other things, it works out very well, along with the fact your creatures are enormous.
Right, we can dive right in. You got 2 copies of Umezawa's Jitte, as well as some Dismembers.
Yeah.
Just keeping steady with the other creature decks and pulling ahead with Jitte.
Yeah, the Dismembers are just the realization that since you're ahead a turn or 2 with your Eldrazi curve, Dismember is fantastic. The life loss is pretty irrelevant. The other 2 copies are in the board. If I happen to play the mirror, I'm ready. And then Jitte, Umezawa's pointy stick of fun. The fact you cast it off of 1 Ancient Tomb or City of Traders activation just feels disgusting, and then the fact that it can take over your creature-based matchups seems like the best 4-mana investment you
can also just suit it up so much earlier and more efficiently than the other decks. You can play a Mimic, or you can play an Endless One, and you can just equip it on the 2nd turn and already have Jitte counters.
Yeah, and against a good portion of the aggro decks and even the Delver decks, which are the aggro decks, one activation of a Jitte and you're probably running away with the game.
Right.
So,
all right, we'll move on to the sideboard here.
Yeah.
Got a bunch of cool ones to talk about. We got Mindbreak Trap that's standing out alone.
Yeah. Got to interact with some of the Storm decks. The card's reasonably powerful. It's nice to make them fear it, and if they happen to duress you on the 1, and let's say they take, referring to Storm, and maybe they take the Chalice, they're now going to deal with Mindbreak Trap, or they do it in reverse. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those cards that, on its own, it's quite powerful, but it has the effects of tying into some of the other things. Like, we're putting pressure on them from multiple directions, and Mindbreak Trap, even as like a one-of, is just such a big looming threat against a portion of the combo decks in the format.
If they see one, they kind of have to assume there's more, or just have the idea that they have to play around multiple copies of this.
Or they're just going to lose, and that's, you got to put the fear in them.
Yeah.
All fear, all the time.
Right. Winter Orb, we saw this kind of pop out when Dylan Donegan had a few copies in his Grixis Delver deck. This looks really good against things like Miracles and lands.
Yeah, and it also ties in nicely with the Trinisphere. We have an ability to effectively time walk an opponent. They tap down for something large. You maybe have Sphere in play already, and they've learned to work around that constraint. You Winter Orb them, and you're casting spells with 2 lands. They're looking at 4 to 5. The obvious dream is you can, get them to have to give up, like, we'll say 2 turns, but even just getting 1 in a format like Legacy with the backing that you have from Reality Dragon Smasher thing, it's usually worth it.
Yeah, that's one thing we see about this deck that a lot of these other prison-style decks didn't have.
Yep.
You're attacking with real creatures in this deck. 4/4s and 5/5s is a lot different than the things these other kind of mud decks were doing.
Yeah, and that's the bigger revelation for all the Legacy folks that were just, oh, Mud's been around, Mud's been this, Mud's been that. That's great. This is Shops. We kill things. That's just better inherently than the Mud decks. I'm pretty sure over the course of the Players' Championship run from a couple years ago, I just abrupt decayed my way through all of these, Mud decks. This deck, on the other hand, you cast the Abrupt Decay and then Thought Knot Seer is attacking you. It is night and day difference, so please do not clump this in with your run-of-the-mill Mud decks. This deck is set up to run over some people and actually make them fear these lock pieces. They're actually lock pieces because you kill them fast enough. Mud, they're more of like a very slow sleeper hold, more annoying you the whole time. So that's a big difference.
Some other cards you already mentioned, the extra Dismember. You have some Spatial Contortions as another type of removal spell, as long as Ratchet Bomb. Play set of Leyline of the Void, and then a Phyrexian Metamorph as well.
Yeah, there was some discussion that maybe we wanted to main deck a couple. The Eldrazi that you already have are fantastic. You cast Metamorph for 3 mana, which is 2 lands. The realization having them in the sideboard anytime a lock piece or an existing piece is just not pulling its weight, you bring these in, and now you're just comboing insanely good creature with Metamorph. If they happen to play something big enough to make you worry, you can Metamorph their guy. And there's some other applications with trying to get some large creatures going. A Knight of the Reliquary, this or that, definitely comes into play. But it's better than it is cute, but it looks really, really cute. So I'm a big fan of it, but I'm sure people are just going to shake their heads and wondering what you're doing. So.
All right, so we've gone over the deck. How do you feel this deck is positioned in the metagame, and is this deck for real? Obviously, you chose to play the deck.
Yeah.
Where do you see this deck going, and how popular and successful do you think it'll be?
I played the deck because I'm trying to become the one and only Eldrazi king. Maybe top 8 another event with Eldrazi. The reason I think it's a solid choice for the weekend is it paces a little bit quicker than most of the decks in the format that are attacking. You have this wonderful Chalice of the Void that I think people have somewhat forgotten about, and it's not intended to be a fair card. You shut off a portion of the meta, but beyond that, I think folks, even though it's everywhere on Moto, your run-of-the-mill, real-life Magic or Legacy player, I don't think they're up to speed with it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Shardless decks rise up and just start smashing this, but if everybody is going to be on some slower fair creature decks or Miracles, this is the deck to play. I am happy to walk in the room and hopefully beat every single Miracles opponent I play against, and I could lose the rest of my matches and still be happy.
All right, well, we wish you the best of luck here. You're already coming off 1 top 8, looking to make it 2 in a row. You're in the 2-bye territory, so thanks for joining me here in the sideboard.
No problem.
Stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all week long for the action here in Philadelphia.